Thank you very much, Benjamin and Paco. I'm very happy to be here with you and to be able to share a little bit of my views on my current thinking on my work with you. It's really an honor. I'll like to share. I will share my screen, and I wanted to put together a lecture that would, as I said, kind of share with you my current thoughts on architecture. And I think that they're very much shaped by obviously the current situation that we're living, but not only because of the pandemic, but I believe something that has been being built up on the last years, which is excessive capitalism that we're living, that really needs discrimination to be able to sustain and survive. And I believe that that has given me the possibility of being able to develop a special sensitivity to projects that are teaching me how to translate possibilities towards enabling social interchanges and relationships that can really go beyond the notion of economical exchange, to open channels for different groups of people that are not being really included in this system. And I think that one of the most teaching projects, for else to say, if I can say that, is a project that we're working for as System Order in Germany. So this is a Cistercian monastery that we will be building in probably a couple of years from now, and that we have been working with these monks for 4 years already. So the project obviously has taught me many things, but and has allowed me to explore a world that I was really not into it. One of the most like important factors that I've learned is that, first of all, I live in a rational world, and they live in a spiritual world that is completely different. But that has allowed me to really be able to elaborate with my rationality towards the possibility of the understanding of many things that they do almost systematically, not almost systematically, that are really giving a lot of tools for us mundane people that live in this rational world to be able to better relate to each other. And one of that interesting understandings is the notion of the scaled possibility of communication, of social relation, and of space that the monks and the monasteries, the Cistercian monks and the Cistercian monasteries has. But many monks and many people that live in the spiritual world live exactly the same, regardless of the type of religion they pursue. And so for a monk, their spirituality is embedded in their body, and their first exterior expression of that internal intimate relationship towards God is the robe. And so that is why the robe is a very specific one, a very important specific one, because it's that first layer, first exterior layer that creates the first relationship within their inner body and their spirituality to the exterior. Then the next one is the cell, and that space is not only as the same as the robe, not only the space that is the space where that spirituality rests and lives, but it's that space that that encompasses that spirituality, and then therefore is a very specific and important space. You open the door of the cell of the monk opens it, and he finds himself in the cloister where all the rest of the monks do the same, is a place of encounter within the small community of monks that they form. Then they together make the procession towards the church, and the church is the place where they really encounter with the whole community of the monastery, but also the same space where they negotiate this relationship to the exterior, because this is where they encounter people that form part of the rest of the community, not necessarily their inner community. And I think that this type of scaled relationships is something that is very clearly staged in smaller communities through obviously different factors and different ways. In a monastery, it's super obvious, but it's super obvious not only socially, super obvious physically within the space that conforms the monastery, but in communities you can find it in many ways as this set of spaces that are really there, that enable different relationships of commonality that in cities we have erased. In cities, we're really living in this completely dichotomized space between private and public that has really banned the possibility of us creating different types of social relationships that would enable a system that could potentially really start to erase those spaces of discrimination and of social impediment to growth. And let me explain you why a little bit I believe on that, but through the lecture. But I also would like to take you to another notion. So it's for me not only the necessity, the imperant necessity of the understanding of those spaces that would enable different social relationships, but to erase the notion or the preconceived notion of the domestic space as we know it right now, in order to open channels for not only eliminating discriminative acts within the even from the intimate sphere towards the more collective one, but also for enabling that possibility of the private space to become that entity that is the foremost important entity to build our own selves and to therefore exist within the collective. I was invited in almost a year ago, 8th of March of 2020, to give a lecture commemorating the International Women's Day. And that day was marking a very important day on the civic life in Mexico, because from November 2019 to March 2020, there was a very important movement, a civic movement for fighting for women's rights that started with a very important and pressing issue, which it was feminicides. So feminicides were escalating in Mexico, and there was a very important civil response demanding to the new president that he was promising to take care of those sectors in society that were underprivileged and were discriminated, specifically speaking about women and impoverished population. So the community, by not seeing any response, and not only that, by seeing an increased amount of feminicide, decided to be protesting about it. So there was this protest that was reprimanded and was not really completely kind of taken care of, which was the feminicides. And so then women started to even be more reiterative about the fact that it was not being taken care, and the protest built up until there was a very big movement being created by March. In parallel, and not because of that, there was a group of women decided to do a Congress of Architecture in Oaxaca, where they invited me to speak specifically on the day of the commemorating women. And I was skeptical to speak about it. I have to say, I have never been very outspoken on gender issues. But this time I decided to, because I thought that by speaking of it myself would kind of put me in a place of discrimination already. But then I understood through the years that it was very important to speak about it. But it was not only important, and I realized this day, to speak about it as a women architect, but as an architect itself, and speaking about spaces that discriminate. And I decided to put a lecture together that would kind of revisit my projects with a gender perspective. And I realized that I have been guilty of creating spaces that discriminate women in a systematic way, um, more than I ever realized before. And this was hard to take, obviously, but I was outspoken about it, and so I declare myself guilty. But I made a promise of really trying to find possible channels to open those possibilities towards architectures that could erase these systems of discrimination. So I think that not only in the domestic realm, but by the same system of even promoting the social housing as it is, you are perpetuating those systems of discrimination. No? And Dolores Hayden has explained us very clearly how the domestic space, as is defined, promotes discriminative acts towards women. But the same Silvia Federici has done in really emphasizing how the economy needs the women to be those caretakers, domestic workers that are not paid. So in order to exist itself, it needs these spaces of discrimination. And therefore, if we think that in architecture, we build those spaces as prescribed in the norms as it is, as they are now, we are perpetuating that discrimination. But not only that, I think that evidently, and if you want me, if you don't follow me so clearly, you think it's a big leap. But at the end, by those acts, we are not being able to create a fruitful and successful, and more than everything, sustainable relationship with the environment. So I think that and truly believe that in order to understand ourselves in the world and to stand within it in a sustainable way, we really need to on erase and unleash those discriminative relationships that we have put together as a system, and that by the architecture that I do are really being perpetuated even more. So in order to give this lecture, I was able to kind of understood the spaces where that I have built that they discriminate. And I have put a program in my office, very thorough, to start kind of determining which are the spaces that discriminate, which are the spaces that open freedoms, that open equality questions, and how can we really engage in a different conversation to change the projects that we do, and to even open possibilities for different things to happen. So I started by the house because this is the most obvious discriminative space of them all, and I have designed several of them. And I wanted to analyze specifically, the fact and the relationship of the body of the self in the space, and the understanding that the social structure that is kind of giving birth to that space, or we don't know what's or the other way around, what comes first, the egg or the chicken. But or if the family is the social enterprise, which is the family that we have created, is being defined and shaped the space that we exist. But I wanted to open these channels to understand how we could really see the house with different lens in order to really eliminate those systems of oppression and discrimination. So to see the house in another lens, I decided to dissect the spaces, no, and start thinking what are those spaces in relationship to my understanding of the monastery that are enabling or maybe prohibiting those possibilities of really erasing these subjects of discrimination. No, so the first instance that I think is the very most important space in the house is the room, is the space that it allow us and enable us to have a restorative moment and space that really is that ritualistic place where we can start endurance our most important habits. And here I'm citing Pier Vittorio Aureli, who has really dissected the notion of the domestic space and the house, and has brought us to the notion of understanding that rituals and habits are what constitute a space, or what should constitute a space that we could call house. No? And we created this house in Ajijic, in the Chapala Lake, in the kind of center west of the country in Mexico, where we designed in very close contact with the owner and the inhabitant of this place. And I would say it's her design, the translation of her design into a house. And in this case, I really find out that not only there is a different definition on what a house should be as every human being in the earth, but that there are many definitions of how a house should be in each human being on the planet. So there are not only 7 billion or more definitions of a domestic space, there are even infinite ones, because it not only depends on oneself, but it depends on the situation of living on oneself. So we designed this house, and then she asked us to design her permanent house in Mexico, in Guadalajara city, sorry. And we thought we knew her very clearly, and all her habits and all her rituals, because we went as far as she asking, what if the boyfriend of my just 13-year-old girl will be a left-handed? So we really went that far. And but when we were starting to design her house in Guadalajara, and I was very confident that I already knew that he really thinks even that it's necessary to think on the soon to be boyfriend of who we do know who it is, of her daughter. And then she started to come with totally different ideas. I realized that it's not only that we really through different people see things differently. Through time, we also see things differently, and through the situation in our lives, we see things differently. So for me, the bedroom is kind of that representative space where we are able to expand the notion of intimacy into a physical definition, into a physical realm. And it is the space where these four walls that can hold that intimate space and that intimate self and that identity can be built upon there, no? So it is a space of exploration, of opportunity, that we could really understood as a soul space. And in why not challenging the possibility of it being alone, and not the necessity of it being fulfilled with other spaces to really become that space that endures our most important habits and rituals, no? In this case, in this house, we were able to question the notion of the specific house and really explore the possibility of different spaces to inhabit the forest, in order to challenge that, no? Then there is the bathroom. We all agree that we all need to clean ourselves, and we all have physiological necessities. But why in the world did we decided that it was really defined by a functional room that in some of the cases doesn't even have natural illumination and natural ventilation? No, it's allowed to build this room without natural illumination and natural ventilation. They can be mechanical. And where did we forget that this place is to clean ourselves, which is a very ritualistic act? That is exactly the representation of taking care of ourselves. No, that is exactly the place not only of taking care of ourselves, but is the possibility of the space of an intimate relationship with other, because we have to take care of others. No, specifically our children or our elderly people. This is the place where we create this intimate relationship of care, and of kind of symbiotic relationship with the other, that our body first and with the other, that could be challenged and don't necessarily need to be that functional room, no, that mere functional room. And speaking of functional rooms, when did we decided that kitchens really needed also to become those mechanical spaces that worked as machines, to being able to provide us with the second most important necessity that we have, or we could even say the first, nurturing ourselves. And when that nurturing ourselves became a mere functional space, when did we decided that to ban that possibility to the communal possibility of it, to the social act of it? No, and I have learned building houses in communities in Mexico that we definitely are having a very wrong understanding of cooking, no? Because if we ban or we neglect cooking into that space that it's often shared with the living area or even with the sleeping area, we really don't allow the possibility of expanding the notion of cooking towards all these, towards its richness of flavor, of smell, that are really enhancing our senses, and are nurturing our body much more beyond than the single act of calories in being swallowed to our mouths. We are human beings that need a very important social part to exist. So how in the world we're able to enclose a kitchen in four walls that are not allowing us to share that possibility with others, but also are not allowing us to decide if we want to cook, if we want to cook individually, if we need to cook collectively, if we need to eat collectively, or we need to eat individually, but what do we need to cook and what do we need to eat in order to be able to establish a relationship with the space that is comfortable? No, because obviously if you think that in my country we cook with a lot of flavors, you don't want to cook like that when you have a kitchen attached to a living space, because you don't want to live with the smell of the onion the whole afternoon after you cook, right? So why in the world we decided that that was a space that needed to be enclosed to a room? We work with a project that was or is, because we still are working on this project of the the brief called for a prototype that could be built anywhere in Mexico. And I decided to work more than with a design strategy that would open possibilities. No, so in this case specifically, and much more, the kitchen is able, first of all, to be decide where in the house it's placed, and what is the relationship of the kitchen with the space at all, if there is one. No, so it's the kitchen outside, so is the kitchen a kitchen to cook or to cook for the family or for others? Is that the place to cook or to sell food, or is that the place not even to cook or sell food? Is that the place to store food or to sell things? Is that the productive space of the house? It is a productive space of care or a productive economical space? No, so this is to be decided by the dweller, and this is why we challenge the notion of the kitchen in this place. And we have built 23 of this model of houses, and definitely we have already seen that there's people that have decided to create a little space to cook and sell, or others that really are thinking of this social space within the four walls of the house. No, but we also started challenging the notion of the kitchen embedded in a fixed cabinet within the house already in 2014, where we decided to create well, we were invited in an exhibition that was to think on the kitchen of the future, and it was kitchen of author kitchen, that's what it was called. And we decided to think on the kitchen, as I really like to think of it, as a very most important space of my house, as the core of my house. And why would I have to create a kitchen that would need to be left behind when I move, or it really didn't be able to come with me when I would be able to change cities or places or whatever. So in this case, I designed a house a kitchen that it's modular, that not only is being able to be moved within the house, so you can also transport the kitchen to the living room if you desire so, if you're not going to cook with fried onion or chile, or if you can transported to your room if you don't want to escape your room for one day, or you can leave it in the space where it's designed, but move it around, rearrange it because you have different necessities. But most importantly, take it with you whenever you leave the space, because it's a space where you really that you really like. It's a piece of furniture that you really like. As you take your couch or your books, you take your kitchen. Later on, we decided to use that model of kitchen to this house, the same house that I spoke in the beginning, with the room that is scattered in the forest. In this case, the living area is another space, and we decided that the kitchen could be movable, and it's not a fixed place, so it could be inside this room or this area, but it could also be come outside in order to cook outside, and then enable different possibilities for an intimate cooking on an interior space, or a more social one in the exterior space, or an intimate social exterior space at all in the same place. No? And with that, I decided to think that I already had questioned the notion of the prescribed and preconceived idea of house since long, and not that challenge much the notion of discrimination, but I think that it already challenged the discrimination of the voices of the others in some way, you know. So in this case, it was a project that, or it is a project because it hasn't been built, and we don't know when it's going to be built, and that it's called Solo House, and this is in Spain. And it's a project called Solo Houses, that a designer decided to commission different architects with no client, in order to allow the architect to really expand the notion of the house without having a prescription of how someone wants to live. And for me, it was difficult at the beginning because of what I explained before, how we like to work with people that are designing spaces. We like to think that they are the ones designing their own space. And so for me, it was very difficult to create that premise. But then on the other hand, I thought, well, this is an opportunity to really be honest, and to think that as an architect, you can truly not build the space that the other imagines. First of all, because you don't know clearly you can speak about it, they can tell about it, but not everybody has the same opportunities to express themselves. But also because there's evidently filters within yourself that are really directing the way someone else lives, no? And this is already a discriminative act in itself. But in this case, since we didn't have anyone else, we took it as an opportunity of thinking, how can architecture become that platform that enables the possibility of anyone to decide how to live? So there is an impossibility. There is this fact that there is the architect deciding something, and we have to decide things. So what we decided is to decide the aesthetical notion of this place in order to create a confrontation or a dialogue with that person that is going to be living there, but not an imposition on how it should live, how it should, this space should be interpreted, or how it should be lived. This should be open to anyone who arrives. So what we decided is to scatter a specific structure, aesthetic structure defined by us within the landscape. So in this case, it's a squared module that has different shapes. Why? Because we like them, literally. And then we scatter them in the landscape, and but not by scattering them using the landscape in different ways. No, sometimes sunken in the landscape, sometimes on top of it. And in this case, we decided then to not direct and define what are the spaces being used by. And this is why it was a challenge even to draw these the plans of this house, because we didn't want it to direct anybody to use the spaces specifically in any direction, but in the only direction that everybody, that the one who inhabits this place would like to do it. So any structure can be, every structure can be whatever. Could be all the structures become one household, or hold one household, or all the structures be for different households, each of them, or each of them should be kitchens or bathrooms or rooms, or none of them. So in a way to allow the dweller to decide how to live and how to inhabit the world, and use it as they want. No, because as I said, we might think that we all have the same basic necessities. We do, but we don't have the same notion on how to fulfill them. And nevertheless, what we are doing now is trying to direct how everybody needs to live. And even the codes and the countries have really directed and prescribed how a house should look like. No, so in this case, we're not able yet to prove that this has a good a good understanding with the person that will use it, because it hasn't been built. But we were able to be invited to another project, which is in the Lake Edersee, in a little town nearby the Lake Edersee in Germany, where we were invited. The brief was calling for projects, and I thought were really much more experimental. And I will tell you why they're not. And we were able to. Well, the brief was telling us to do a house that would be for the new ways of life. And for them, the new ways of life was living and working in the same place. For me, that was really strange, because, and this was 2017, even before pandemic, and the notion of us now living and working really truly in the same places, even in the cities. But then for me, it was already strange, because living and working in the same place has been happening throughout humanity. Just before we decided to first define the notion of work as different of that of the domestic work, and the work we need to do to really exist ourselves, to take care of us, the reproductive and domestic work that we have to do. But that notion really only exists, is still in this today, in the big cities. No, in the rest, in the more rural areas, really the notion of living and working within the same place is still a very much embedded idea. And now in the cities is going to truly transform, and right now even more radically with the pandemic. No, so then that is not a new way of living, that is a way of living. And what we did is we created a chart to think on the ways and different ways of living. And what we wanted to do is create a chart of different activities that we think many of us or most of us share, and emotions that we also share as humans. No, not that all of us process them in the same way, not that we even do them in the same way, but that we have that those as humans. So what we did is we choose which ones we wanted to focus, and which ones we wanted to enhance and promote, in a way to say, in this house. And then we define those 6 spaces, and we in words, and then we define them through collages. And why we did that, because I mean, it's a subject for another lecture, why we do collages and how we do them and how we use them in the process of design. But one of the things that I'm going to say is, in this case, was the first project that we really use it as a process of design, and not only as a representation tool or a representational a concept for the finished project or the conceived project, but as a tool. And what we did is we collage those 6 spaces differently in 6 different collages, to really be able to sorry, express the different spaces that we wanted to create here. And it was very interesting, because already from there we realized that all of us, we interpreted, all of us in the design team in my office, we interpret differently images, and we really have different senses on what an image does. So this is why even collages proved to be much more a it's successful, because they were enabling a conversation and an interpretation of a space that already comes only from laying down an image in a white page. No, so what we did is we, as I said, collaged them all the 6 spaces. And then when we had them all the 6 ones, we created a whole drawing, and this would be kind of the conceptual idea of that house, the notion of the house and the spaces we wanted to promote. And from there, we jumped into the design. And I would say that we probably have arrived to this point with exactly the same preconceptions on how we design normally. With, you need to do a house of 900 square feet of 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, one kitchen, one living space, and we probably would have arrived to the same, except that in this case we didn't start it like that, and we didn't and the space is not arriving to the same place, because now we have a client, and now we have, well, client, I hate the word client. Now we have someone that would like to build this house, and has interpreted the space in a completely different way that we have conceived it. And this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to enable a space that would allow the possibility for someone else to live as they would like to live, and not to impose a way of living. We're definitely imposing a space already, that the form of a space, the shape of a space. Why do we implicitly with that have to give the notions of how the space should be used? So I think that with that, we were able to open a little bit more the communication, and enabling possibilities for the relationship with the space in a different way. No, so not only like in this image, by the people taking the space that has a very specific way of being inhabited into their accountants and their kind of representation, no, like these. There are identical houses that people have taken over and kind of making themselves, but really enabling within the roots of the space a possibility towards that. No, and I think that we have learned uh, a lot of that in when we were rebuilding houses of the earthquake in 2017, the 7th of September and 19th of September. There were 2 very big earthquakes, where we were only assisting the people building their own houses, and assisting them technically. No, and we really understood how different the notion of domesticity is to everybody. But not only that, we experience it in our hands, the possibility of they producing their own house. So the social production of habitat became really a subject for our work in the future. And right now, what we're trying to understand is how to enable that even in collective housing in the middle of the city, with the impositions of the economical system, of the private property issues, etc., etc. No? We have worked also to understand what is it about the common space that can enable those possibilities. No, so we have designed these experimental design strategy of different modules that could be interpreted by anyone as anything. Obviously, there's some that are more functional because they have more mechanical installations, but also the rooms can be placed and as they want, related to each other as the relationship of the family works, and they can create an outdoor space or not. But they also, as by the display on how they're used, depending according to their materiality and their possibilities, they also can be arranged in different ways that they are enabling different relationships with the community. No, and this is a little bit the notion on how to enable different relationship with the community towards expanding the possibility of those spaces of negotiation. No, and this is something that we have really explored even in the more collective spaces, like in this project in Monterrey, where we have really understood that by putting a set of stairs that connect 4 units in a different way, we can enable the possibility of those 4 neighbors to relate among themselves without having the necessity of having the association of condominiums or the institution of, or the governmental institution that regulates normally all the communal spaces that we have, in a more personal way. No, in order to enable another possibility and erase this dichotomy of between the notion of private and public that is reigned by private or public means, in order to enable a more communal and communal space that will kind of open possibilities for many others. So this building has, as I said, is 164 apartments, but they have different relationship within each other. They haven't erased the notion of the preconceived conventional form of 2 rooms, a bedroom and a bathroom. But at least they are trying to create small possibilities and small possibilities of change within its own impossibilities of market-driven client, etc. No, but well, this is being built. We still don't know what is that expression, but we hope soon I can tell you what that has become. No, and not only that, taking it even further into the built environment and the vertical realm, we have also understood that we need to think how to densify our cities, and densify them in a more sustainable way. For me, sustainable means to enable these social possibilities that I've been speaking throughout the lecture. And I think right now the vertical environment doesn't allow us that. No, the vertical typology allows one vision, one structure, one entity that bans completely the possibility of the notion of diversity, of the acceptance of diversity, by imposing a way of using the space, of being in the space, of inhabiting the space. So we have been challenging that by creating this idea and this notion that we presented in the first, we did it as a studio at GSAP in Columbia University. And then we were asked to present it in the Chicago Biennial of 2017. And what we did here was this really bringing different possibilities for enabling a structure, a vertical structure that is created within time and within different actors. No, so we invited 29 or 30, I don't know, or whoever, because we even did some iterations of it, to each choose a space, and as the city is done in an exquisite corpse manner, being built, it's in different moments of time and in different possibilities of program and in different expressions aesthetically, to then encompass, one of notion of and one vision. And I think that then the city then allows us to also reflect on the notion of that social space, that public. Now if we arrive there, to the public and social space that we all need to then relate to the collective. We have worked in a botanical garden in Culiacan, which I'm not going to explain in detail, but one of the most important notions here was being able to listen to the already existing space, but that we can do even by not listening to that important space. It doesn't exist, but it exists as surrounding. And in order to understanding that, with very small in few interventions, as this pond in one place, we were able to engage in a social relationship with the ecosystem that didn't happen, or by adding some hammocks in a specific point, we were able to add a stop into this visit that would really allow you to reflect on a different perspective with the different plants. But by opening the irrigation system in towards the public, you are able then to engage with the really what keeps this garden alive, with the notion of water that keeps this garden alive. But also, not only that, the art that was placed in the garden, which is curated by someone else, it was also enabling different possibilities of relating towards art, which are impossible in a museum. And these are all artists that are super well known, and they are all featured in this super incredibly high standard in at sometimes elitistic institutions. But in this case, they were open, like a piece by Olafur Eliasson or Dan Graham or Richard Long, artists that would normally be completely, out of reach for these people, were placed in this garden in a more open way, to also start creating those relationships with art that are not being able to happen in a museum, no? But also our architecture was intending to do the same, and is opening these possibilities of relationship with the environment that allow us, as I said in the beginning, to create a notion that we as society don't have. It is not we and nature, is not we dominate nature, or not nominate, or nature dominates us, or we are creating these things. We are part of nature, and we are embedded in this system that we have been fighting to be embedded with, that we much need to engage with. So our architecture in this case would expose you directly to that nature. So we have created these buildings that they have like soul functions. So you are here and it's an auditorium, but the bathrooms are outside. Yeah, and if it's raining, you get wet. But if a bird is singing, you hear him, and you really understand the notion of being in the middle of the botanical garden and being able to relate to nature in a way that will enable these more productive relationships of understanding that we are nature, no? And my last thought will go to present you very shortly the very recent project that we are doing, which is in a research center of the Sea of Cortez. And in the beginning, this was an aquarium, and then only an aquarium. And for me, the aquarium is kind of that very problematic space that is a kind of the representation of the man controller of the universe act. And I love this mural by Diego Rivera, which is called exactly that, man controller of the universe. And it's really about a space. An aquarium is a space that brings to humans that world that we cannot access, even because we don't think as we are that that space to nature, to us. And so why not we encapsule a world to be able to see it. So we decided to work with the people that were going to be building this in a park that we already had designed. I'm not going to stop and describe the whole park, but we designed this park understanding that there was going to come an aquarium and a museum. And when we were commissioned to do the aquarium, we decided to change the notion of that, as we were understanding the notion of the ecosystem of the regulating lagoon on of the park as a system within the city. The same, we decided to integrate this space that they intended to have as an aquarium, as a center that really can enable a relationship with the city towards the sea. And they have the most one of the most important natural aquariums in the world, which is the Sea of Cortez, just there. So the aquarium is here, and the Sea of Cortez is already here. So we decided to push them to bring forward the notion of a building that is invaded by nature, that in 2100, this building that we don't know why it was built or who built it and why they built their purpose, it was flooded. The sea covered the whole building, and then in 2200 the sea receded, and we were able as humans to arrive there and discover that there was all this life growing into this building, into this structure. And then we arrived and we were able to open possibilities to discover this world within our notion of rationality in the contemporary world. So the place is to aim to be discovered from the top, where there's a endemic botanical garden that grew there. And then you are able to immerse yourself through these stairs into the aquarium that was, as I said, flooded at some point, and then open for us to discover, and was taken by nature. And we were lucky enough to be able to discover this nature within its walls. And this building is right now being built by who knows who for who knows what, and soon going to be immersed with life and being able to be discovered by people. And with this, I finish with the notion and possibility of thinking on all those ruins that are going to be abandoned by this pandemic, and the possibilities that they offer to us, nature, to coexist in this building. Thank you very much.